This week we're going to take a look at what, at least for me, is an uncomfortable standard of conduct. I'm going to call it the uneven Stephen proposition. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus establishes a pattern with his audience. He says, you have heard it said, X, and then he says, but I say to you. So in other words, there's a common or a standard understanding of this issue, but I'm bringing to you a different perspective. Frequently in the Sermon on the Mount, he subverts the long-established expectations of the people. And we're going to look at one particular chunk of that today in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38, 39, and 40, and 41. But we're only going to look at chunks of the Greek from each of the verses because there are chunks that are sort of illuminating and interesting, and that's what we will focus on. So let's start out with verse 38 from Matthew 5. This is from the ESV. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So we're focusing on the quote, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So ophthalmon anti ophthalmu kai odonta anti odontas. So what we have here is in each of the pairs we start out with an accusative case noun, ophthalmon and odonta. Then we have anti, and anti normally means against, but when we have it with its own referent like this in the genitive case, because ophthalmu and odontas are both in the genitive case, what we're getting is an exchange. So what have they heard? They've heard an eye in exchange for an eye and a tooth in exchange for a tooth. This comes from Exodus 21:24, Leviticus 24:20, and Deuteronomy 19:21. In modern parlance, this is generally treated like a call for revenge or for even Stevenism, like you're entitled to get even. But at the time that it was initiated, back in Exodus or back in the Torah, it was quite innovative. It was not a life for a tooth. If somebody knocks out your tooth, you kill them. It placed limits on things, and it was an equitable limit. If a person lost an eye, they were entitled to be compensated for an eye. If they lost a tooth, they should be compensated to the tune of a tooth, not a life for an eye. And on the inverse, not a tooth for a life. If someone were powerful, if someone were, say, a slave master or a major political figure, and that they killed someone, they didn't make restitution with something smaller than a life. This established an equitable court system where people were made whole for their losses. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, set limits and created equity. Important stuff there. But over time, even Stephen became the expected standard. And remember, as we go forward, it was intended to establish justice with fair limits. That was the purpose of this concept. So let's carry on and look at verse 39. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So I want to look at the first part and the last part. Me anistenai to ponero. So do not resist the evil one or the one who is evil. The ESV says the one who is evil, which is a better way to say it because it doesn't lead you into think that he's talking about the devil. He's talking about a person who is committing an affront to you, who is assaulting you. So if an evil person, if someone who does you harm, such as slapping you on the right cheek, then we get to the last part. He says, strepson auto kai tain alein. Strepson is turn, auto, to him, kai also, tain alein, which is a form of allos, which is another of the same kind. Turn to him the other cheek. You've got two cheeks and they're of the same kind. One is on the right and one is on the left. He says if you get slapped on the right cheek by the one who does evil, by the evil one, turn to him also the other cheek of the same kind, your left cheek. So what is he saying? He's saying rather than getting even, rather than exacting that equity, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, provide another chance to the wrongdoer. It's an amazing thing to suggest. The other thing that you need to note in the verse is there's no reference made to an expectation of what the wrongdoer will do with that additional chance. There's no contemplation that you might in fact get slapped again. But what the implication here is rather than getting even, if you do this thing that Jesus says, you're providing an opportunity for someone to do better or to do the same or potentially to do even worse. But regardless, what you will have done is you will have offered grace in place of justice. You will have made the uneven Stephen choice. Pretty interesting. I don't know if you want to make that choice, but it's what Jesus suggests. You've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but what I'm saying to you is when confronted with the evildoer, don't resist. Rather than seeking even Stephen, offer an opportunity for the person to do better, but just accept he may do the same, he may do worse. Moving on, let's go to verse 40. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. I only want to focus on the last part in Greek in this one, but first the English part. This is a person with the desire to sue you over something, take you before a judge with a claim. And the claim is that tunic should be mine, okay? And he says, if that happens, let him have your cloak as well. And that's the part we're looking at. Aphes auto kai to hemation. Aphes is interesting because it's the word forgive. And the word forgive means to let go, to release, to relinquish. So here Jesus says, if you get taken before the judge for your tunic, and the implication is the judge rules against you and in favor of the one who's suing you. In other words, if you're found at fault, if you're found to be wrong, and the award to the other person is your tunic, he says, relinquish, release, let go also the hemation, the top garment that goes with the cloak, with the tunic, pardon me. Give him not just the thing that he sued for, but give him the outer garment that also goes with that cloak. If it turns out that you are wrong, if the judge determines that you are wrong, do more than the minimum. The minimum would be even Stephen, right? Because eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the person suing you for the tunic is found to be entitled to the tunic. That would be tunic for tunic, right? That would be even Stephen. But Jesus says, but I say to you, don't just give him the tunic to which he's entitled. Give him the outer garment too. Don't just do the minimum. Be uneven Stephen. Wild stuff. Not sure if you dig it or not, but it's wild stuff. Let's go on and look at 41. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Again, we'll just look at the last part. Hupage met autou duo, go with him too. So they're in a society where they could be compelled by a Roman soldier or an official to carry a burden for up to 1 mile. So you could be pressed into service. Hey, here, carry this for me. And you would be obligated to do so for up to 1 mile. But what does Jesus say? Jesus says, go with him too. So the official limit is 1. That's the standard maximum here. So for you to do the minimum would be to meet the maximum, to go a mile. But Jesus says, rather than strict compliance, turn 1 mile into 2 miles. Now, anyone who knows me knows I am no math magician. Math is not my strong suit, but even I know that if you're compelled to do 1 and then Jesus says you should do 2, he's advocating for a 100% increase. Go above what's required of you by a full 100%. Pretty wild stuff. So if you're focused on even Stephen, you're going to do what you must. I'm obligated, I'm required by the law to bear this burden for a mile. But if you're focused on uneven Stephen, as Jesus is advocating, then you go 2 instead of 1. So obviously, it's up to you in your day-to-day life whether you decide to pursue even Stephen or uneven Stephen. That's your business. I've got nothing to say about that. But I want to talk about why Jesus is doing this thing that he's consistently done in this section of the Sermon on the Mount. Why is he advocating uneven Stephen? In the broader context of this gospel of grace, what you can see in his message and through Paul's sort of breaking out of what grace means, what you keep seeing is you don't get what you deserve, you get much more. Mercy triumphs over justice. It's never about one and done. It's always about additional chances. It's about more being given than is asked, and it's about doing more than is required. It's about going further in the journey or farther. I'm not sure if it's further or farther in the journey than is required. That's what grace looks like. That's what you're hoping to receive. In our most honest moments, none of us want to receive what we deserve. We're hoping for mercy over justice in many, many ways, right? So pretty fascinating stuff. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, even Stephen. That places a limit, and it also is a call for equity. We're talking about a fairness. If you're wronged, you should be made whole to the tune of the wrong. But then Jesus says, I say to you, you should consider uneven Stephen and go farther than is required, give more than what is owed, don't return a slap for a slap, but rather offer grace and mercy in place of justice and give somebody a chance to do better. They might take it, they might not. You might get slapped on the left also. But Jesus at least advocates for uneven Stephen. Do with that what you will. Thanks for watching. I hope that was good for you. If it was, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, share the channel on social media, etc., etc. And until next time, Karis Kai Reine Humin, grace and peace to you.